31 Historical Myths That Turned Out to Be True, Part 2. What if the crazy stories your history teacher dismissed were actually documentaries with bad PR? We're back with another round of myths that archaeology refused to let die. Ancient superweapons that sound like video game items, medical practices that actually worked, and monsters that turned out to be migration patterns with teeth. This is part 2 of historical myths that stopped being myths when someone started digging. Because apparently, ancient people weren't making things up. They were just reporting what they saw before science had the vocabulary to explain it. Number 1. Greek fire was a real superweapon. For centuries, historians treated the Byzantine Greek fire as an exaggerated legend, a mysterious flamethrower weapon that could burn on water and couldn't be extinguished. It sounded too much like ancient napalm to be real. Then evidence kept piling up. Multiple historical sources from different cultures all describe the same terrifying weapon, a liquid fire projected through bronze tubes that ignited on contact with water, burned intensely even in storms, and could only be smothered with sand, vinegar, or urine. The Byzantine Empire used it from the 7th to 13th centuries to incinerate enemy fleets. The recipe was a state secret so closely guarded that it was eventually lost entirely. We still don't know the exact formula. Modern chemists theorize it involved petroleum, quicklime, and sulfur, creating something genuinely terrifying. The myth of an ancient flamethrower that burned on water wasn't fantasy. It was classified military technology that happened to be so effective nobody could believe it existed. Number 2. Mithridates really did immunize himself to poison. Ancient sources claimed King Mithridates VI of Pontus was so paranoid about assassination that he spent years taking small doses of various poisons to build immunity. When he was finally defeated by Rome in 63 BC and tried to commit suicide by poison, it didn't work. He'd actually succeeded in making himself poison-proof. Historians dismissed this as propaganda. Then modern toxicology proved the concept of Mithridatism is scientifically valid. You can develop tolerance to certain poisons through gradual exposure. Arsenic eaters in 19th century Austria proved it worked. The king supposedly had to have a soldier kill him with a sword because poison no longer affected him. Ancient biochemistry, accidentally stumbled upon by a paranoid ruler. The myth was just early immunology with a dark twist. He literally poisoned himself to safety. Number 3. The Lighthouse of Alexandria was 400 feet tall. Ancient descriptions of the pharaohs of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders, claimed it was impossibly tall, over 400 feet, with mirrors that could burn enemy ships with reflected sunlight. Modern historians assumed this was typical ancient exaggeration. Engineering that scale seemed impossible for the ancient world. Then archaeological evidence and structural analysis confirmed ancient sources were actually quite accurate. The lighthouse was indeed around 384 50 feet tall, taller than a 30-story building, making it one of the tallest structures in the ancient world for over a millennium. It had a working fire beacon visible from 30 miles away. The burning mirror thing might be exaggerated, but the sheer scale was real. Ancient engineers built a skyscraper in 280 BC that stood for over 1,500 years until earthquakes finally destroyed it. The ancient world's engineering was legitimately science fiction until we found the receipts. Number 4. Aztecs really did practice large-scale human sacrifice. Spanish conquistadors described Aztec human sacrifice as industrial-scale slaughter, tens of thousands killed annually, hearts torn out atop pyramids, Tzompantli, skull racks, holding thousands of skulls. European historians for centuries dismissed these accounts as exaggerated propaganda to justify conquest. How could a sophisticated civilization be that brutal? Then archaeologists started finding the evidence. In 2015, they discovered a massive Tzompantli near the Templo Mayor with over 650 skulls displayed, and that was just one rack. Historical records mention multiple towers. Chemical analysis of temple stains confirmed large quantities of human blood. Skeletal evidence shows the methods described were accurate. The scale wasn't exaggerated. It might have been underreported. Aztec cosmology genuinely believed the sun needed human blood sacrifice to continue rising. The myth of exaggerated conquistador propaganda was itself the myth. The Aztecs were architecturally, mathematically, and agriculturally brilliant and practiced ritual human sacrifice on a massive scale. Both things are historically true. Reality doesn't fit comfortable narratives. Number 5. Ancient Egyptians really did perform brain surgery. Ancient Egyptian medical texts describe trepanation, drilling holes in skulls, with detailed surgical instructions. For ages, historians assumed these were symbolic or mythological texts. Nobody was performing actual brain surgery 4,000 years ago with bronze tools. Then examination of mummified remains and skeletal evidence proved otherwise. Multiple skulls show clear signs of trepanation with evidence of bone healing, proving patients survived the surgery. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, circa 1600 BC, describes 48 surgical cases including head trauma treatments with stunning anatomical accuracy. They understood the brain's role in controlling body functions, had specialized surgical instruments, and used honey and willow bark, containing aspirin-like compounds, for pain and infection. Success rates were obviously lower than modern surgery, but the myth that ancient medicine was all superstition and herbs is completely false. Ancient Egyptian surgeons were drilling into skulls, removing bone fragments, and treating brain injuries, with patients surviving the procedures. Neurosurgery is thousands of years older than we thought. Number 6. Medieval surgeons could perform cataract surgery. Medieval medicine is portrayed as leeches, prayers, and ignorance. The idea that medieval surgeons performed delicate eye surgery sounds absurd. Yet medieval Arabic and European texts describe couching, a technique for treating cataracts by pushing the clouded lens away from the line of sight using a needle inserted into the eye. Modern ophthalmologists tested the described techniques and confirmed they'd actually work. Medieval surgeons genuinely performed cataract operations with specialized needles, with reasonable success rates considering the technology. They understood ocular anatomy well enough to describe it accurately. The myth that all medieval medicine was worthless superstition ignores sophisticated surgical knowledge that existed in specialized schools. Some techniques were horrifyingly wrong, sure, but some were legitimately effective procedures performed with remarkable skill. Medieval surgeons were stabbing needles into eyeballs to treat cataracts centuries before germ theory. Sometimes they even succeeded. Number 7. Medieval castles had murder holes for pouring boiling oil. Every castle tour guide mentions murder holes, machicolations, designed for pouring boiling oil on attackers below. Historians have long dismissed this as myth. Oil was expensive, boiling it dangerous, and historical records never actually describe using it. The murder holes were real but supposedly just for dropping rocks or shooting arrows downward. Recent research found that while boiling oil was rare, too expensive, and dangerous, defenders regularly poured boiling water, heated sand, which gets under armor, quicklime, causes chemical burns especially when combined with water sweat. And yes, occasionally hot liquids including oil when available. Account books from castle sieges list defensive provisions, including items for heating. The myth wasn't that murder holes existed or that defenders dropped things. It was assuming they only dropped rocks. Medieval defenders used whatever psychological and physical warfare they could. Boiling oil specifically might be exaggerated, but the concept of pouring horrible things on attackers was absolutely real. Creative medieval violence meets architectural design. Number 8. Viking berserkers were probably high on drugs. Saga descriptions of berserkers, Viking warriors who fought in trance-like fury, felt no pain, bit their shields, and had superhuman strength, sound like fantasy literature. No actual human behaves that way, except multiple historical sources from different cultures describe the same phenomenon. Modern analysis suggests they were likely using psychoactive substances. Possibilities include Amanita muscaria mushrooms, which cause aggression, pain insensitivity, and altered perception. Henbane, a powerful deliriant, or deliberate hyperventilation techniques combined with ritualistic behavior. Some researchers suggest it could be a psychological state induced by ritual and group dynamics, essentially self-induced psychosis. The behaviors described match drug-induced states remarkably well. Vikings had access to these substances and knowledge of their effects. The myth that berserkers were literary inventions ignores consistent historical descriptions and archaeological context. Viking special forces were probably an early example of chemical warfare against themselves. Gets you hyped for battle, terrible for long-term health. Ancient peds with horrifying side effects. Number 9. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon might have been in Nineveh. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon are one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Greek and Roman writers described them in detail: terraced gardens with trees and plants seemingly floating in the air, watered by complex irrigation. The problem is, no archaeological evidence of them exists in Babylon. For years, scholars assumed they were pure myth. Then Dr. Stephanie Daly proposed something radical. What if the Hanging Gardens existed but ancient writers got the location wrong? She found evidence of massive gardens in Nineveh, Assyrian, not Babylonian, built by Sennacherib around 700 BC, with complex aqueducts and irrigation matching ancient descriptions. The confusion might stem from Babylon and Assyria being conflated in later Greek writings, or from Babylon being used generically for Mesopotamia. The gardens might have been real, just 300 miles north of where everyone was looking. The myth wasn't the gardens. It was assuming ancient writers never made geographical errors. One of the 7 wonders might exist. We've just been excavating the wrong city for centuries. Number 10. Roman concrete was superior to modern concrete. Roman structures like the Pantheon and Colosseum have stood for 2,000 years, while modern concrete often deteriorates within decades. Ancient Romans supposedly just got lucky or built things ridiculously thick. Modern engineers assumed Roman construction was brute force, not sophistication. Then materials scientists analyzed ancient Roman concrete and discovered something remarkable. It's actually chemically superior to most modern concrete, especially in seawater. Romans used volcanic ash, pozzolana, mixed with lime and seawater, creating a chemical reaction that made the concrete stronger over time, not weaker. Seawater interaction creates aluminum tobermorite crystals that reinforce the material. Modern concrete uses Portland cement, which doesn't have this property and degrades from saltwater exposure. The Romans accidentally discovered self-healing concrete chemistry that we're only now starting to understand and replicate. The myth that we've obviously surpassed ancient technology in every way ignores that we literally lost the recipe for better concrete and spent centuries using inferior formulations. Ancient Rome's harbor structures are still standing underwater. We're just now figuring out how they did it. Number 11. Ancient Polynesians navigated thousands of miles without instruments. For decades, Western historians couldn't explain how politicians colonized islands across the Pacific spanning millions of square miles. The assumption was they got lucky, drifted accidentally, or the distances were exaggerated. Intentional navigation across thousands of miles of open ocean without compasses, maps, or instruments seemed impossible. Then in the 1970s, the Polynesian Voyaging Society built a traditional double-hulled canoe, hokulea, using only ancient techniques, and successfully navigated from Hawaii to Tahiti and back. Polynesian navigators used star paths, ocean swells, bird behavior, cloud formations, and bioluminescence to navigate with remarkable accuracy. They could detect islands beyond the horizon by reading wave patterns. Their mental maps and oral knowledge systems were sophisticated enough to guide voyages across thousands of miles. The myth was assuming navigation required Western instruments. Polynesians had different technology, experiential knowledge and environmental observation refined over generations. They weren't lucky. They were expert wayfinders using methods Western science initially refused to recognize as legitimate navigation. Ancient GPS was just pattern recognition excellence. Number 12. Ancient batteries existed in Baghdad. In 1936, archaeologists found clay jars in a rock containing iron rods suspended in copper cylinders, dating to around 200 BC. One archaeologist suggested they might be ancient batteries. The scientific community mostly dismissed this as pseudo-archaeology. Why would ancient Mesopotamians need batteries? Then people started testing replicas. When filled with acidic liquid, vinegar, wine, or fruit juice, these Baghdad batteries actually generate electricity about 1-2 volts. Not powerful but functional. Modern recreations prove the design works. What they used electricity for is debated. Electroplating jewelry, some artifacts show evidence of electroplating, religious magic effects, or medical treatment. Ancient texts mention tingling treatments. We might never know for sure, but the devices genuinely produce electrical current. The myth that ancient peoples couldn't understand electricity is harder to maintain when they literally built working batteries 2,000 years ago. Whether they understood what electricity was is different from whether they could harness it practically. Ancient Mesopotamians might have been casually electroplating gold jewelry, while Europeans were still centuries from understanding electrical theory. Number 13. The Peary Rise map showed Antarctica before it was discovered. In 1513, Ottoman Admiral Peary Rise created a map showing the Atlantic Ocean, the Americas, and what appears to be the coast of Antarctica, roughly 300 years before Antarctica was officially discovered. Conspiracy theorists ran wild with this. Skeptics dismissed it as coincidence or misidentified South America. Recent analysis suggests something stranger. Peary is likely used ancient source maps, possibly Phoenician or even older, that somehow contained accurate geographical information from eras of lower sea levels or brief warming periods. The map shows features of Antarctica's coastline that would only be visible without ice cover. Some scholars suggest it was compiled from older maps showing South America's southern coast, distorted in ways that coincidentally resembled Antarctica. Others argue it's evidence of pre-Columbian contact and knowledge. The map is real, housed in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace. How Peary Rise got information that seems impossible for his era remains genuinely mysterious. The myth that all geographic knowledge begins with European exploration ignores that maps were copied and compiled from far older sources. Sometimes ancient cartography knew things it shouldn't have been able to know. Number 14. Ancient Romans really did use urine as mouthwash. Roman writers mention using urine for cleaning teeth and whitening. Modern people assume this was either metaphorical or exaggerated Roman weirdness. Using piss as toothpaste is too disgusting to be real, right? Completely, factually true. Romans imported Portuguese urine specifically because it was considered high quality. Urine contains ammonia, which is actually effective at removing stains and whitening teeth. This is why ammonia is still used in modern cleaning products. Emperor Nero even taxed the urine collection industry. Public toilets had collection systems because urine was valuable for both laundry and dental care. The practice was so common that Catullus, a Roman poet, mocked someone by implying his bright white smile came from drinking using large amounts of urine. It worked chemically, which is why the practice continued. The myth that Roman hygiene was primitive ignores that they understood practical chemistry, even if they didn't know why it worked. Sometimes ancient grossness was actually ancient science. They were right for the wrong reasons, still revolting but functionally correct. Number 15. Ancient Chinese invented earthquake detectors. In 132 AD, Chinese inventor Zhang Heng created a seismoscope, a bronze vessel with dragon heads holding balls and toads below with open mouths. When an earthquake occurred, a ball would drop from a dragon's mouth into a toad's mouth. indicating the earthquake's direction. For centuries, Western historians assumed this was mythological, a decorative legend, not real science. How could a simple mechanical device detect earthquakes? Then in 2005, Chinese researchers built a replica based on historical descriptions, and it actually worked. The internal pendulum mechanism responds to seismic waves, releasing the ball in the direction of the earthquake. It successfully detected test earthquakes with reasonable accuracy. Ancient Chinese were building seismological instruments 1,700 years before Europe attempted similar technology. The myth that only modern science can detect earthquakes ignores sophisticated ancient understanding of mechanics and seismology. Zhang Heng's device was real, functional, and remarkably clever, using gravitational response to seismic waves to indicate earthquake direction. The ancient earthquake detector that worked gets dismissed as a myth until someone bothers to build it and test it. Number 16. Medieval people really did try to domesticate bees for warfare. Medieval warfare manuscripts describe using bee bombs, containers of angry bees catapulted at enemy troops or dropped from castle walls. This sounds like Monty Python absurdity. Who weaponizes bees? Except multiple historical sources from different regions describe bee warfare. Attackers would seal hives or containers of bees and throw or catapult them into enemy formations. Besieging armies facing castles or fortified positions occasionally faced sudden swarms of intentionally released bees. It was psychological warfare as much as physical troops in armor facing thousands of stinging insects would break formation or retreat. The myth that medieval warfare was all swords and honor ignores that commanders used every advantage available, including biological warfare with insects. Bees were free, self-replicating, and genuinely effective at causing chaos. Instructions for bee warfare appear in legitimate military treatises. Ancient and medieval people were creative about violence. If you could weaponize insects, why wouldn't you? Biological warfare is older than ethics. Number 17. The Antikythera device had differential gears. We mentioned the Antikythera mechanism being an ancient Greek computer, but the full story is weirder. When scientists fully analyzed it using modern imaging, they discovered it contains differential gears, a sophisticated mechanism that wasn't reinvented until the 1700s. Differential gears allow wheels to rotate at different speeds while being mechanically connected, crucial for astronomical calculations and modern car transmissions. The device calculated lunar and solar eclipses, tracked planets, and predicted astronomical events years in advance. It's more technologically sophisticated than anything that followed for over a millennium. The ancient Greeks built a precision astronomical calculator with mechanical computing features that wouldn't appear again until the Renaissance. Finding this is like discovering a Roman laptop. The myth that technology always progresses linearly ignores that civilizations can lose knowledge. The ancient Greeks had mechanical computing capability that was completely lost and had to be reinvented from scratch over 1,000 years later. Technology regression is real. Number 18. Medieval peasants had more vacation than modern workers. Modern people assume medieval peasants worked brutal hours constantly, barely surviving. The myth of the oppressed medieval worker slaving ceaselessly is everywhere. Except when historians actually analyzed medieval work schedules, they found something surprising. Medieval peasants worked hard during planting and harvest seasons, but had numerous religious holidays, feast days, and festivals off. Estimates suggest 150+ days per year were holidays or rest days. Work was seasonal, intense when needed, but with considerable downtime. The medieval calendar was packed with saints' days and religious celebrations that meant no work. The Protestant work ethic and Industrial Revolution actually increased working hours for common people. Modern 40-hour work weeks plus overtime actually mean many people work more annual hours than medieval peasants did. The myth of constant medieval suffering ignores that pre-industrial agricultural work was seasonal and community church systems mandated significant time off. They worked hard, but they worked different. Intensive seasonal labor with extended breaks, not modern year-round grinding. We might actually work more than medieval peasants. That's depressing. Number 19. Ancient Amazonians really existed. Greek mythology described Amazons, warrior women who lived without men, fought like soldiers, and cut off one breast to improve archery. Historians assumed this was pure myth, maybe symbolic representation of barbarian cultures. No evidence of actual Amazon societies existed. Then archaeologists started excavating Scythian burial mounds in Kazakhstan and Ukraine. They found graves of women buried with weapons, armor, and battle injuries matching those of male warriors. DNA analysis and skeletal trauma showed these weren't ceremonial burials. These women fought in combat. Some graves contained women with arrowheads lodged in bones, healed battle wounds, and full military equipment. About 25% of Scythian warrior burials were women. The Greeks weren't inventing Amazons. They were describing real steppe warrior women they encountered and couldn't understand cultural processes, so they mythologized them. The breast removal thing was likely Greek exaggeration, but warrior women were real. The myth wasn't the warriors. It was assuming male Greek writers could accurately describe foreign cultures without adding fantasy elements. Ancient Greek fanfiction was based on actual warrior women. They just added dramatic details. Number 20. Medieval trial by ordeal might have been fair. Medieval justice included trial by ordeal, walking on hot coals, holding red-hot iron, plunging hands in boiling water. And if you healed quickly, God had proven your innocence. This seems like obvious superstition and cruel injustice. Except historians analyzing the actual practice found something interesting. The ordeals were administered by priests who controlled the procedures, and records show suspiciously high proof of innocence rates. The theory: priests used their discretion to rig ordeals. If they believed someone innocent, they'd use relatively cooler water metal or apply protective coating. If guilty, they'd ensure proper temperature and burns. The system was essentially letting religious authorities make decisions while maintaining the appearance of divine judgment. Success rates were too high to be random. The myth that trial by ordeal was pure superstition ignores that it might have been sophisticated theater allowing authority figures to override mob justice while maintaining religious legitimacy. Still unjust by modern standards, but potentially less random than it appears. Medieval priests were running a shell game with God's will as cover. Surprisingly pragmatic corruption. Number 21. Ancient Mayans used chocolate as currency. Conquistador accounts described Mayans and Aztecs using cacao beans as money, with set exchange rates for goods and even taxes paid in chocolate. Modern historians assume this was metaphorical or Europeans misunderstanding ceremonial use. Using literal chocolate as currency sounds absurd. It would rot, be eaten, and couldn't store value. Then examination of Mayan and Aztec economic records confirmed it was completely literal. Cacao beans were standardized currency with established exchange rates. One turkey cost 100 beans, one slave cost 3,000 beans. They had sophisticated economic systems with inflation, counterfeiting, fake beans stuffed with mud, and regulation. Cacao was the perfect currency for their economy. Valuable, portable, useful, naturally limited supply, and culturally significant. They even had bean banks for storage. The myth that ancient economies were primitive barter systems ignores that they understood money, interest, markets, and taxation, just using different materials. The chocolate was legal tender. Imagine paying taxes in Hershey bars and having it actually work. Ancient Mesoamerican economics was sophisticated capitalism with delicious currency. Number 22. Medieval people really did have pets and treat them well. The myth that medieval people viewed animals purely as tools or food, with pet ownership being a modern sentimentality, is everywhere. Except medieval wills, literature, and artwork show extensive evidence of pet culture. People kept dogs, cats, and birds as companions, not just working animals. They gave them names, mourned their deaths, commissioned portraits, and left them inheritances. Medieval texts complain about pampered lapdogs in church. There are recipes for dog food and medical treatments for sick pets. Archaeological evidence shows cats and dogs buried in ways suggesting they were mourned, sometimes even in human cemeteries. The medieval French included provisions protecting pets in legal codes. Medieval people weren't emotionally different from us. They loved their animal companions, got attached, and treated their favorite animals as family members. The myth that love for pets is modern ignores consistent historical evidence that people throughout history formed emotional bonds with animals. Medieval nobles leaving estates to their favorite hunting dogs wasn't unusual. People have always loved their pets. The past wasn't emotionally alien. Number 23. Ancient Egyptians really did mummify millions of animals. Ancient sources mentioned animal mummies, cats sacred to Bastet, ibises for Thoth, supposedly in the millions. Modern historians assumed this was an exaggeration until archaeology proved otherwise. Animal mummy deposits in Egypt are absolutely massive. The Saqqara catacombs contain millions, literally millions, of mummified animals. 8 million dog mummies, 4 million ibis mummies, countless cats, snakes, crocodiles, bulls. They weren't all pets. Many were bred specifically for religious sacrifice and votive offerings. It was an entire industry, farms breeding sacred animals, mummification workshops, priests selling mummies to pilgrims as offerings. Chemical analysis shows they often killed very young animals in huge numbers to meet demand. Some mummies were just wrappings with a single bone inside, ancient Egyptian religious fraud. The scale is staggering. The myth that ancient animal mummification was occasional or symbolic ignores industrial-scale religious practice. Ancient Egypt had a multi-million animal mummy industry. Religious fervor meets mass production. They were franchising death cults for pets and producing mummies like a factory. Ancient gig. Number 24. Vikings really did discover America 500 years before Columbus. This one finally got confirmed. Viking settlements at Elance Ox Meadows in Newfoundland prove Norse explorers reached North America around 1000 AD. For decades, this was a disputed theory. The sagas described Vinland, Norse settlements in a western land, but were dismissed as legend. Then archaeology found actual Norse buildings, artifacts, and evidence of iron smelting in Newfoundland, dated to approximately 1000 AD. Genetic studies show Norse DNA in some Native American populations. More sites are being discovered. Vikings didn't just discover America, they established settlements, traded with indigenous peoples, and maintained contact for years, possibly decades. They just didn't permanently colonize or publicize it widely. The myth wasn't the Viking voyages. It was assuming European discovery began with Columbus. Vikings got their first established settlements, and the information was simply lost when the settlements failed and European interest faded. Columbus discovered a shortcut to America that actually worked economically. Vikings discovered America, decided it was too much trouble, and left. Historical credit goes to whoever published better. Number 25. Ancient Greek statues were garishly painted. The classical ideal of pure white marble statues is burned into Western art history. The Renaissance worshipped classical restraint, museums showcase pristine white marble, and art students study form without color distraction. Except ancient Greek and Roman statues were originally painted in bright, bold colors, reds, blues, golds, with detailed patterns, realistic skin tones, and even jewelry added. The paint simply wore off over millennia. We've been venerating ancient art in a way ancient people never saw. Modern analysis using UV light and microscopic paint traces reconstructed the original colors, and they're bold, sometimes garish by modern standards. Think Las Vegas mixed with religious iconography. Renaissance artists who defined Western aesthetics based their entire movement on a misunderstanding. They copied the blank white marble, not knowing it was originally day-glow and detailed. Ancient art wasn't minimalist, it was maximalist, loud and proud. The classical white aesthetic is an accident of decay that became an aesthetic movement. We've spent centuries imitating what ancient art looked like after it was ruined. The myth of restrained classical taste was invented by people who didn't realize they were looking at faded remains. Ancient Greece was a riot of color. We inherited the bleached version. Number 26. Medieval books cursed thieves. Medieval manuscripts frequently contained curses written in the margins threatening book thieves with elaborate supernatural punishments, excommunication, being dragged to hell by demons, being struck by lightning, having their hands wither. Historians assumed these were symbolic literary threats, not literal beliefs. Except medieval people genuinely believed written curses had power. Books were incredibly valuable, months or years of labor to produce, and theft was common. The curses served as legitimate security systems in a world where physical security was difficult. They combined religious authority, excommunication threats, with supernatural fear, demonic punishment. Some curses were surprisingly specific and creative. May the book return to its proper owner by whatever means necessary, or may the thief's hand freeze when attempting to open this book. This wasn't just decoration, it was a medieval drama. The myth that medieval curses were purely symbolic ignores that, in a society where most people believed in supernatural intervention, a written curse was a functional security measure. Medieval copy protection ran on fear of divine retribution. Modern cybersecurity is probably less effective than medieval "may demons eat your soul" warnings. At least people believed those. Number 27. Ancient Romans really did use poison detection rings. Roman sources describe rings containing materials that would change color or temperature in presence of poison. This sounds like fantasy, magical poison-detecting jewelry. Except chemical analysis of surviving poison rings found some contained bezels of stone that genuinely reacted to certain alkaline poisons by changing appearance or temperature. A unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk, was believed to detect poison and was ground into powder for testing. Some snake stones, bezoars, could absorb certain toxins. None of these worked reliably or scientifically, but they weren't pure superstition either. They showed rudimentary understanding that some materials react to certain chemicals. Combined with paid food tasters, poison testing animals, and careful political awareness, Romans had systematic poison detection protocols. The myth that ancient poison detection was purely superstition ignores that they used every method available, and some accidentally worked through chemistry they didn't understand. They were right for wrong reasons. Ancient toxicology was vibes-based science that occasionally scored hits, better than nothing in an era where poisoning enemies was standard political procedure. Number 28. Medieval people really did have accurate eyeglasses. Eyeglasses were invented in Italy around 1290, and within decades spread throughout Europe. The myth is that medieval people had crude, barely functional vision correction. Except surviving medieval eyeglasses and contemporary descriptions show they understood optics remarkably well. They produced clear glass lenses, understood convex lenses for farsightedness and concave for nearsightedness, and made frames durable enough that examples survive 700+ years. Detailed paintings from the 1300s show people wearing glasses that look essentially modern. They lacked precision grinding technology, so lenses weren't perfect, but they were functional and widely available. The myth that medieval people couldn't correct vision ignores that once the principle was discovered, it spread rapidly because it genuinely worked. Medieval technology wasn't always primitive. Sometimes they invented something and immediately got it mostly right. Eyeglasses in 1300 were roughly as effective as reading glasses today. Medieval people were reading books with corrective lenses while using them to write manuscripts about the glasses themselves. Functional assistive technology existed 700 years ago. Vision correction is older than printing presses. Number 29. Ancient Polynesians bred chickens that reached South America before Europeans. Genetic studies of pre-Columbian chickens in Chile showed they were more closely related to Polynesian chickens than European breeds. This suggests Polynesian voyagers reached South America before European contact, meaning sustained trans-Pacific contact between Polynesia and South America existed. The myth that the Pacific was an uncrossable barrier ignores that Polynesians were exceptional sailors with ocean-crossing capability. They brought chickens, sweet potatoes which appear in Polynesian islands, and possibly other trade goods. The evidence is complicated and debated, but genetic signatures don't lie. Those chickens came from somewhere, and Polynesia is the only plausible pre-Columbian source. Polynesians might have reached South America, traded and left, without anyone writing it down. Oral histories mention voyages to far eastern lands. The myth that the Pacific isolated cultures are wrong. Polynesians were sailing across the Pacific making contact with South America potentially centuries before Europeans tried. Ancient globalization ran on outrigger canoes and navigation expertise. We keep discovering ancient people traveled farther than we thought possible. Number 30. Medieval people really did understand quarantine. When the Black Death hit Europe in the 1300s, medieval authorities implemented sophisticated public health measures including quarantine, 40 giorni, 40 days, isolating sick individuals, restricting trade and closing ports. The myth is that medieval people blamed divine punishment and handled the plague through superstition. While religious responses existed, authorities simultaneously implemented evidence-based medical isolation. Venice created the first organized quarantine system in 1348. Milan's aggressive quarantine measures are credited with limiting mortality. They understood contagion conceptually, even without germ theory. Medieval medical texts describe disease transmission through contact and contaminated air. Their responses mixed superstition with practical public health policy that actually worked. The myth that medieval plague response was purely religious ignores that parallel rational public health infrastructure existed. They didn't know about bacteria, but they understood that sick people made others sick and separation reduced spread. Medieval quarantine was sophisticated enough that we literally still use their word and basic principles. Epidemiology is older than microscopes. Sometimes empirical observation works even without theoretical understanding. Number 31. Ancient Egyptians really did have pregnancy tests. Ancient Egyptian medical papyri describe pregnancy testing by having women urinate on wheat and barley seeds. If wheat sprouted, the baby would be male. If barley sprouted, female. If nothing sprouted, not pregnant. Modern scientists assumed this was pure superstition until 1963 when researchers actually tested it. The wheat-barley gender prediction was nonsense, but the pregnancy detection worked with 70% accuracy. Pregnant women's urine contains elevated estrogen that promotes seed germination. Ancient Egyptians stumbled onto a functional pregnancy test 3,500 years before modern medicine, using seed germination as a bioassay for hormone detection. They didn't know why it worked. The gender prediction shows they misunderstood the mechanism, but the basic test was scientifically valid. The myth that all ancient medicine was worthless ignores that empirical observation sometimes produces working methods even without understanding the biology. Ancient Egyptian women peed on seeds to detect pregnancy, and it actually worked better than chance. Endocrinology existed before anyone knew what hormones were. Ancient medicine was hit or miss, but sometimes hit harder than expected. So there's 31 more historical myths that archaeology and science dragged into the actually happened column. From Roman piss mouthwash to ancient batteries, from weaponized bees to chocolate currency, history keeps proving that the crazy stories were usually just regular stories told by people who couldn't believe what they were seeing. Ancient people weren't making things up. They were accurately describing a world that seems impossible until you check the evidence. The real myth is thinking we're so much smarter than our ancestors. We're not. We just have better tools to prove they were right all along. Which fact blew your mind the most? What other myths do you think will turn out to be true? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey through history's receipts, smash that like button and subscribe for part 3, because apparently history has an unlimited supply of things that sound fake but aren't. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and remember, today's conspiracy theory might be tomorrow's archaeological discovery.